It's easy to look around and notice everything wrong in your city. In this podcast by Every Neighborhood Partnership, join Grace and Andrew as they invite friends, activists, pastors, leaders, and city workers to discover what's good in the neighborhood. Join us for insightful conversations that will encourage you to see your city and its people in a new way. Welcome back. On this episode of What's Good in the Neighborhood, Andrew and I get to sit down with Mark and Lyn Baker. They are pillars of the Fresno community, and they've recently moved away, but we got to chat with them online about spiritual formation and spiritual practices. Mark is a retired professor, as well as an author of many books, and his wife, Lynn, is a spiritual director. They both are a wealth of wisdom, and as they enter that second phase of life, had much of it to share with us. You're not going to want to miss this one.
Well, welcome to What's Good in the Neighborhood, and we are glad that you have decided to join us in this amazing series on soul care and leadership. Grace, how are we doing?
I'm doing well. We batch record these, so this is 3 of 3. So we've been going.
And my heart is full.
Yes.
And it's going to be fuller here. That's the amazing thing about hanging out with people you love. On this podcast, we are going to hear from Mark and Lyn Baker. They are former Fresno natives who are on the East Coast, but have really played a big part, I think, in so many weird Fresno ways in the life of our organization. So Lynn was my spiritual director. Mark was a professor for several of our staff. He's spoken at the church I go to. The Fresno, urban and pastor church community is real. And we have just, as I was thinking through the series, Lynn has really been a great influence in my life. And even we've had her come do some work with our staff at times and places. So I thought, man, they are like living examples of folks that are trying to live a very counter-American discipleship. And Mark writes on that often, and I've read 2 of his books. And so just great, thoughtful humans. And so thanks for joining the podcast today, Mark and Lynn.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
It's a joy.
Well, let's just start. Give us a little context, each of you, a little bit of your story, that what has brought you to the work that you're doing today. Just give us a little snapshot narrative of some of the things you've been involved in. How did you find yourself as a professor? Lynn, how do you find yourself as a spiritual director? And I'm sure you all have many hats, but those are probably 2 of the prominent ones. So
why don't you go first? You.
Yeah, so this could be a long story, but let me just briefly say I had no thought of being a professor. I wasn't even interested in theology, and I ended up being a theology professor. But what changed for me was living in Honduras and Central America and encountering situations that the theology I have wasn't up to dealing with. And that was both on the justice, poverty, war, and violence side of things, but then also especially encountering people who had pretty unhealthy, distorted images of God. And I came to think theology really matters. And then I wanted to be in a position where I could be influencing people who would be going out and, pastors, counselors, teachers, shaping other people's theology. And I was very fortunate that Fresno Pacific Biblical Seminary hired me 26 years ago now, and I just retired a year ago.
Fantastic. That wasn't a long story.
No, I made that
a lot
short.
in a little.
I could be long.
It could be, yes. Yeah. It could be a whole podcast for sure. Yeah. Lynn.
Okay. Well, it was neat thinking about this question, which thanks for giving it ahead of time. And I realized it goes back to when I was 8 years old. I remember being a pretty serious little girl and upset about some of the things I'd been taught at church. And my parents said, "Why don't you talk to the pastor?" So I talked to the minister, and I remember thinking as a little girl, he didn't help me. When I'm a grown-up, I want to be the kind of person that people can talk to about God and maybe actually be helped.
Wow.
So fast forward, I'm in my 20s and I go to a retreat led by Wendy Miller, who was then a professor at Eastern Mennonite Seminary. And she introduced us to Christian spirituality, which in my kind of traditional evangelical upbringing, I hadn't encountered. And so being introduced to some prayer practices, which I realized, oh, this is kind of what I've always been looking for, ways to be with God that are heart-centric, not just head, and also engage feet and hands in the world. So I became just captured by this. And when we were missionaries in Honduras, I began to share these things, retreats, beginning to walk one-on-one with people in spiritual direction. And later I was a hospital chaplain. And while I love that work, after 15 years, I noticed, the times I come home just energized are when actually I'm doing more spiritual direction than traditional chaplaincy. And I knew it was time to give all of my vocational energies more to spiritual formation, spiritual direction. And I've been privileged for the last 10 or so years to do that.
So good. Thank you guys so much for sharing your stories, and goodness gracious, what amazing,
There's a lot of depth there.
Yes. And that your lives found each other, I'm sure is a whole, we could do 4 podcasts with the Bakers. Mark, you wrote, you've written a lot of books. One of the books you wrote was Centered Set Church. And you speak often about being a Jesus-centered community. And then, of course, your experience across culture, being missionaries, how that's informed you guys. So how has that, being Jesus-centered, how has that shaped the way that you view spiritual formation, or the way you both view it? And how has that formed the way that you teach others as well?
This is a great question. And again, I think we've already said it twice, but we could do a whole podcast just on this. So I mean, just to start with, say that, how, sort of put in a sense of how is being Jesus-centered in contrast and tension with if we're going with the stream of culture and society. So just for instance, society is achievement oriented, and in a sense of what's it mean to be a successful person is to get things done, to do things. And so, personally, that's certainly and a point of tension with me with spiritual formation is doing versus being. And spiritual formation is going to emphasize being, but from kindergarten, we're we give rewards for achieving, for merit, and Jesus is the opposite. It's oriented with grace. So just to say that in a very broad way, there are lots of things we could talk about here, but I'm gonna think I'll just talk about 2. One that's more sort of theological, and one that's more sort of societal, cultural. And so Lynn is the spiritual director in this pair, and I am not. The reason I mention that is because this story comes from being at a conference, at a session on spiritual direction. But so is it this big conference they have every year of theology, Bible, and religion professors, thousands and thousands of them, and they have all these different sections. And so there's one for professors of spiritual formation, which is not one in any of my years I'd ever gone to. But I noticed in the program that Roberta Bondi was speaking, and she's an author I like. So I go into this session, Roberta Bondi's speaking, and I'm sitting in the back row. This is not my crowd, but I want to hear Roberta Bondi. And she starts talking. And for the story to make be a little better, I've written a book on the atonement. And all of a sudden, Roberta Bondi is talking about the atonement and how people think about the atonement. And then she says to these spiritual formation professors, she says, we do all this work about spiritual disciplines and stuff. But she said, the reality is, if someone in their being, if the God in their being is, an angry, distant, judgmental God, we can do all the spiritual formation stuff we want. They are still going to not be in good shape. And I just sat up in the back of the room and thought, oh, so actually my theological work about trying to help people think about the cross differently matters for spiritual formation. Okay, so I guess I just did a book promo, but I meant the story more to say, in thinking about spiritual formation, Yeah, I mean, the practices and all that are obviously key in what matters, but who is the God that you are seeking to be devoted to? And there's this great quote that I used to write up on the whiteboard in one of my classes, and this is by William Temple. And he said, if your concept of God is radically false, the more devoted you are, the worse off you will be. So you just think about that for a moment. If the more false or the more distorted your concept of God is, then being more devoted is going to put you in worse shape than not. So yeah. So as the theologian in the couple, I want to say, hey, how you think about God really matters in all this. So it's not just doing these disciplines, but it's who your concept of God is. And now to come back to your question, Grace. So Jesus-centered, the very best thing I think we can do as far as shaping our concept of God is to look at Jesus and to say, okay, what's God like? Look at Jesus. And if the image, the way you think about God is in tension with what we see in Jesus, go with Jesus. That's the best revelation we have of God. So that's one way that I think that theme relates to spiritual formation. And right now, like I want to preach or give a Bible study or something let's heal our concept of God. But I just say, if you'd like more on that, read chapter 4 in the book Grace mentioned, Centered Set Church. So that's a theological thing. Now, the other thing in this sort of cultural stream that is really different. Back 15 years ago or so, think of what were the biggest businesses in the world. They were things that made things, like General Motors or something like that. And what are they today? The biggest, wealthiest, companies in the world today are not ones that try to sell us stuff, but ones that try to grab our attention so they can sell our attention to other people giving ads. So just think about the consequences of that for spiritual formation, that there are people out there every day, every workday, trying to figure out how to grab your attention. So in spiritual formation, again, before we even get to talking about practices themselves, I think we have to deal with the things, the phones in our pocket, our digital devices. And again, this could be a whole podcast. I'll just give you one quote from Andy Crouch. This is from a book, The Tech-Wise Family, short little book. I highly recommend it. And so with his family, they even made a commitment, 1 hour a day to be tech device free, 1 day a week to unplug, and 1 week a year. So 1 hour a day, 1 day a week, 1 week a year, be tech device free. And that, I think, would be a step towards creating more space for a Jesus-centered spiritual formation.
At Every Neighborhood Partnership, we believe that strong, vibrant communities start with engaged, empowered residents. But to make that happen, we need your help. EMP is on a mission to connect neighbors, create opportunities for local leadership, and transform neighborhoods through education, collaboration, and advocacy. And every dollar you donate goes directly to supporting programs that make a real difference, whether it's providing land use education, elementary literacy mentoring, or healthy spaces to help kids and families grow. When you donate to Every Neighborhood Partnership, you're not just giving money. You're investing in a future where every neighborhood in Fresno has the tools and resources it needs to thrive. Your contribution, big or small, helps ensure that our communities have a seat at the table in the decisions that affect them most. So, if you believe in students excelling, community members that are healthy and whole, and our neighborhoods thriving, we invite you to make a donation today. It's simple. Just visit everyneighborhood.org or tap the link in the show notes to give. Your support helps develop the next generation of leaders like Fresno depends on it. Donate now to Every Neighborhood Partnership.
Do you feel like your global experience allowed you to see on both of your ends? Did it allow you to see the American culture? Because I really do think of both of you as having a cultural critic lens. in a way that I think most folks are just going with the stream. We're just like, hop in and let's go. Did the cross-cultural experience of stepping out of America, seeing other cultures, those dynamics, and then stepping back in, was that like part of what has shaped you, or was that just always the way you've thought about? You've always been a little counterculture radicals.
No, not always. At least me, maybe Lynn. Yeah. So just like one example of that. I mean, when you started talking, I just pictured, seeing a Honduran out in their field, hoeing their crops, and or even maybe more in the urban setting we lived in, standing in the bank. And I always had a book or a magazine with me because I'd always end up waiting somewhere or other. And I'm just so oriented to getting stuff done. And I'd see these Hondurans, standing around patiently waiting. And I often think, like, how different their life is than mine, because I am so oriented to getting stuff accomplished, getting stuff done. And now that doesn't mean, the Honduran out in the field is doing deep reflection, but there's the possibility they are, where it's me just, charging down the path, trying to get things done. I am not. So that's, one little example. I don't know. Do you have something comes to mind?
What came to mind, Andrew, when you asked that would be more lifestyle. I so often am aware when I'm in a store that I have a little Honduran on my shoulder, evaluating or helping me to evaluate, do I really need that? Is given the incredible needs in our world, am I really going to spend money on that thing? So that has been a real gift to orient. I love that line, live simply so that others may simply live. And living in a developing world helped that become very real. Yeah, it's not abstract.
That's really helpful and just a practical tool. And especially that's a quote to live by, right? Live simply so others may simply live. Lynn, how have you seen spiritual direction or soul care practices that you've implemented into your own life bring healing or transformation into the individuals or spiritual communities that you work with?
I guess I would say release from guilt or burdens of shame would be the first thing. I love to work with internal family systems, which is a therapeutic model that many spiritual directors have found super helpful to become aware of parts of us that aren't our core self, but there are parts of us that may hold burdens that are not ones that Christ is inviting us to carry. And so to be able to learn the inner dance steps of noticing this part of me and then bringing it to Jesus for healing and transformation, both in my own life and then when I sit with someone and watch, it almost feels magic. Of course, it's not magic, it's the Holy Spirit at work. But so often people will say, oh, I feel so much better because the transformation has begun of something that has been heavy. I have noticed that as people engage with spiritual practices, that kingdom priorities begin to sink into them like water into dry soil, and it shows up in their life. One woman told me, after beginning contemplative prayer, I'm somehow just more aware of the world we live in, and I'm doing things to care for the earth, and I care about climate change, doing something about it. And that wasn't a direct line. It was something that welled up within her because of her centering prayer practice. Just this week, I was with a church leader, and we were talking about certain voices that would be more accusatory, that would be critiquing areas of their life, and we were able to notice, is that the tone of voice that the Spirit of Jesus would be speaking? Or is that the tone of voice of the accuser? And think, oh, the shepherd is so capable of letting us know, oh, go here instead of there. I invite you to shift without ever being hurtful. So those are some of the kind of things I just love to watch emerge. And I see it happen in my own life as well as people I sit with. And it's very encouraging.
what keeps coming up in our conversations as we've had talking about soul care and leadership is that like original family that like I don't know. I think to most people that are thinking about leadership and then also thinking about doing stuff, accomplishing things, and then spiritual practices, like why do you guys keep going back to my family? Like why is that a part of this equation? Like as that question's thrown out, like why do you think this is like vital, important work? Why has that been a tool that you find is so important to allow God to speak into in people's life?
We talk about spiritual formation, but there's also T formation, or is that a word? Yeah, the way we're T-formed instead of beautifully whole. And I think it's often in our early experiences that we learn things that just are not true. I felt like there was something intrinsically wrong with me. How different than the way God looks at us with eyes that say, you are beloved. And so going back and looking at some of the early burdens that we've been carrying around so that they can be released and transformed, it's crucial. Yeah.
And what happens in your like experience or even as you kind of analyze the world, what happens when folks don't do that, right? Like what happens when we don't slow down or don't take time to examine those narratives?
Well, I've been playing with Matthew 25. So near the end of the gospel, when Jesus is saying, yeah, I'm calling you to feed the hungry and clothe the naked, and that whole list. And I played with that internally. How about the parts of me that are hungry? Am I feeding them? Are there strangers within that I'm not welcoming? And I certainly think Jesus meant that in an external way, but I think it's okay for the Lord to look internally. And then I picture what would the world look like if everybody let Jesus be the shepherd caring for their internal world. Maybe we wouldn't have hungry people out there. Maybe we wouldn't have jails. Maybe the sick actually would be cared for. So I just see a direct link between the internal work that we're all called to do and that Jesus does in us and then calls us.
I hear you both making that thread. And to go back to what Mark said, and then you just echoed it, Lynn, of like what you think about God informs how you enter into the practices, and how you even hear his voice or the tone of voice that he uses or the questions that he asks you. Where in your guys' experience, as you've watched other leaders lead, whether that be in pastoral positions or nonprofits, where do the wheels fall off? Like when do we've talked a little bit just internally about like the amount of abuse in organizations and leadership power structures. Like as you guys have walked alongside people, what are like the first like dashboard lights when you're walking with someone? You go, oh, something's wrong, or if this isn't handled right now, something's going to break. In your guys' experience, what has that looked like?
One thing that comes to mind is the distressing polarizations in our society, but I think we as individuals are really often tempted to do the cancel culture, hopefully not in the macro overt ways that we see in society, but it's such a strong pull right now. And I think we can do that even in a relationship between two people. So whenever there's a sense of seeing another person or that group over there as all wrong, or me or us, any us, them, we are the right ones, instead of seeing holistically, I think that's even another way to just wave the internal family systems flag again. Internal family system sees us each having parts. As a part of me may be angry. A part of that person or that group may not see the whole picture. But that doesn't mean that they're all bad. So to keep seeing as much as we can ourselves and others with honesty and as whole people and groups. What comes to your mind?
Yeah, I thought of a negative and then maybe the positive flip side of it. But negative is, yeah, just self-absorption. And yeah, I think when I was first in Honduras, I was walking around with so much guilt for being a rich North American. I mean, I actually wasn't. I was, in a North American sense, I was very poor, but I was from North America, you know, and so I was from this rich country, and at that time there's political stuff going on in Central America that a lot of people were upset with, and I was just striving so hard to show people I'm different, you know, I'm a different kind of gringo, I'm not like them, and looking back on it, I did good things, but also I think there was so much of me in it that I'm sure I could have done much better things if I hadn't been so oriented to be thinking about what people were thinking about Marcos. And so that the positive side of this, and this kind of brings both of your questions together. Why does this matter? Why is this important? So the first president at the seminary, the president of the seminary I was first hired, Henry Schmidt, he would often say, you know, it's amazing how much you can get done if you're willing to let other people take the credit. And I, you know, I think that's true, you know, in general, but certainly in the nonprofit realm, if I'm willing to let other people get the credit, things are going to go better. Okay, so where does that come from? How? Like that is not that is yeah. I've spent, you know, a whole big portion of my life trying to maneuver in ways that I would get the credit, or that people would at least acknowledge, you know, like, oh yeah, Mark's done this. So how to become free of that, I think, is resting in the reality that I'm a, you know, valued, loved child of God, that I'm at the table with Jesus because of what Jesus has done. And therefore that can free me to not be as uptight about other people noticing whether, I did something or not done something.
Ever wondered what makes your neighborhood unique, or how the history of your city shapes the places you love today? Well, now you can explore the story of Fresno like never before, right from your car using the VoiceMap app. Introducing the Every Neighborhood Partnership Drive Tour, a self-guided audio tour that brings your community's history, landmarks, and stories to life. As you drive through local streets, EMP's Drive Tour will guide you with fascinating insights into the people, places, and events that have shaped your neighborhood. Whether you're discovering hidden gems, learning about community activism, or simply enjoying a fresh perspective on familiar places, this tour is a great way to connect with Fresno in a whole new way. So, what are you waiting for? Tap into the Every Neighborhood Partnership Drive Tour today on VoiceMap and get to know your community like never before. Download the VoiceMap app, search for the Every Neighborhood Partnership Tour, and start exploring now. Fresno's story is waiting to be discovered.
You know, one of the things I've appreciated about both of you is a heart for justice. You know, I think in the world we sit, you know, we see both an individualistic Christianity in our society, in our churches, in the way we do faith. I also, you know, EMP sits at an interesting point where we're also in a lot of really progressive, justice-oriented conversations because we do see the systemic issues, but I see also a justice work, an action without a rootedness. But like it feels like in sometimes the Christian circle outside of maybe like the Black church, there's a very disconnect between these, like what's the world of soul care and the world of justice. And even in like spiritual direction spaces, they're often pretty white, like, you know, and there's a lot of layers to all these things, but like do they work together? Are they opposing forces? How have you experienced them in your own lives as you've tried to, you know, be people of faith and action, and also come from a deep place of knowing that we're loved and practicing your faith in a way that's really rooted?
I really appreciate something I learned from Mark, actually, that justice in Hebrew means right relationship. And so then if we look at who God is in the Christian understanding, we say God is a Trinity. So what is that? It's a mystery of the flow of love between the persons. And so if that is the blueprint of all that is this flow of love, then we are invited to be in relationship with that flow. And then that goes out into the world. So for me, that's been just a helpful way to play with the idea of it starts with love. It's not even, the word righteousness and justice can have almost a rigid feel, but actually, if it's a flow of love, that brings so much light and warmth, and hopefully we'll have a multi-directional justice, righteousness, love. It's the vertical and the horizontal. It goes in every direction. It's not just me and God, and it's not just the laws. It's everything.
Yeah, so I could come up with something to say from the direction of contemplative towards action, but that's not so much my experience. So I'll take the other part of the question, and again, well, it relates to what I was saying before. If I had been a healthier person back in my early days in Honduras, I think it would have been better, not just for me, but for others. And so I think although there is a natural tension for a more activist kind of person to think like, why would I take time to go take a day to go on retreat, think what I could get done, or take time, to step aside. But the reality is that we will do, I think, better justice work if we are taking care of our spiritual rootedness and giving time to that. I say better. I mean, when I said that word, I think, like, what do I mean by better? And I think, in a sort of quantity, getting stuff done, I think some of that. But I think more, it will be richer, deeper, more holistic. And I'm working on a memoir right now, looking back on my years in Honduras and sort of things I learned seeking to accompany, help the impoverished over the years. And one big theme would be, in the beginning, I was so focused on economics that, hey, they're poor, they need more money. And the longer I was engaging with people in Honduras, the more, we're still involved economically in helping people in programs in Honduras, but of seeing, people's, their burdens of shame, lack of dignity. And so I think as I become more in touch with those things myself, I'm more sensitive to that in others. And systemic injustice includes people being shamed, people being, losing their dignity. And so I think us taking more holistic care of ourselves will better enable us to be instruments of God's holistic shalom in working with others as well.
That's really beautiful. And I've heard, because, some of the work we've done, when helping Hertz or some of these other frameworks that, and then my experience of working with folks in Fresno who are low income, they name poverty as shame, as like, a deep sense of being unvalued.
Yeah.
So the work of healing has to be there for them, but like, that's often the broken thing. There's the folks doing the work to help them also haven't healed their own brokenness or shame. They're covering it by helping them, right? And so that cycle is never going to be generative. That cycle is never going to be restorative, if that's true.
Yeah, well said.
What's the first step, just really practically on the ground, for that helper, that doer that just keeps going and is using the helping kind of as a blanket over their own inner work they haven't done yet? Let's say they come to an awareness of like, oh, okay, something's wrong. The check engine light is on. What would be their next first step?
Well, yeah, I'm going to say talk to someone like Lynn. I mean, but seriously, in the sense of like, I could say something, right now, but the reality is, for everyone listening to this, they have different issues and needs, and so to talk to someone else who has, some pastoral juices in them to say, hey, I've become aware of this. What are things you think I need to work on? How could I start?
Lynn, what would you say?
I'd say, oh, how wonderful that you're aware of that light on the dashboard. Maybe it's a deep invitation from the God who loves you as well as the world, but loves you, to to listen to the parts of you that are in pain and are crying out for whatever it is. I think if we have a hunger, it's because there is something that will fill that hunger. If we're thirsty for something, well, there is water, and so let that thirst lead you. Don't be satisfied with cotton candy when there's carrot cake. There is the real in the world, and so start seeking and knocking, and you will find. And we're also different. What is medicine and food for one may not be for another, but once you start, you will find what you're looking for if you begin. I remember when I first moved to Fresno, and I was wondering where do I engage? And someone told me, well, it's easier for God to steer a car that's moving. In fact, if you're moving, well, then you can turn 180 degrees, but just start with something. And of course, I like your idea of, find someone to talk to.
Yes.
Yeah. And
Good.
I guess, well, this is just personally, find some way to pray. That's what I found when I went to that retreat all those years ago. Someone who could teach me the basic inner dance steps of what prayer is, because isn't prayer communion? And that's what we're all created for communion with our core self and the deepest place in the cosmos, which is God.
Yeah. So good. I ask because I think sometimes we just need to hear it out loud, like from a trusted source, like just talk to somebody. And, I think especially in nonprofit space or even ministry space, the longer you're in it, the more accustomed to those burnout symptoms. You can see it in yourself. You can see it in other people. I can feel like a tightness in my chest when I know like, oh, I'm moving into my shadow, which is to control. Like I can feel it viscerally. And so sometimes all we need is someone else to be like, just move the car and take that next right step. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, one, and honestly, Lynn, thanks for being somebody for me over the years. I've had a executive coach of this last year, so we haven't met. But I think to be able to name where I'm at, I'm a half empty or critic kind of first voice, right? And so to be able to just put it out, and then as you just did, say, "Oh, that's a gift. That's a gift of an invitation." I'm like, you know what it is? It's not bad. That's an invitation. Like, yes, that's a reframing.
Yeah.
And then to go, well, what do you think God would say to that? Like, I haven't honestly thought, and so I think, as we land the plane here, I know that's, Lynn, you may be open to that. Is that something, if anybody wants to reach out that is listening, is that something, are you still taking clients?
Yes, absolutely. I don't call clients. It's direct T and director, in the sense of who is the midwife and who is the person in labor with the newness that God is creating. So you can reach out by phone. I'm not sure how.
We'll put your email maybe in the show notes or something.
Yeah, or by email.
Mm-hmm.
Mark, and I know you got a couple books, and it sounds like you're working on a new one. If somebody wanted to find you, I know. And then I actually, I'm a very regular reader. I still read blogs. I'm still a blog guy. And Mark puts out blogs. So I just read one this week talking about how to listen to folks. So Mark, how do people follow you, kind of learn about your work?
So I think best would be, I have a website. It's profmarkbaker.com. So PROF markbaker.com. And there's, lists of my books there, and also the blog you can sign up for.
Yeah. Well, just even on behalf of our own staff, and we'll do a roundtable at the end of this series, but you both have, if not personally, just culturally are very influential here at Every Neighborhood Partnership. And so thank you. One of our internal staff values is that we're Jesus-centered. And that's straight from Mark, of like, what does it look like for people from all denominations and walks of life that we're all at least headed in the same direction, and we're inviting people in on that journey. So thank you. We're really grateful for the both of you.
Great to be with you.
Yeah, thank you. Good conversation.
Thanks for tuning in. If you want to find out more about EMP, you can visit us at everyneighborhood.org or follow us at EMP Fresno. Every Neighborhood Partnership and this podcast exists to activate, equip, mobilize, and transform here in Fresno and beyond. If you liked what you've heard, please share and review what's good in the neighborhood wherever you listen. We'll see you next time.